Welcome into the Section YY8 podcast. Negative Niece coming to you. I'm solo this week. A little delayed on getting an episode out to everybody. We were supposed to record on Wednesday night to break down the Tennessee Kentucky game and some previous games. Harb had a little bit of a plumbing issue, I think, last night, he said. So no Harb this week. He's just way too busy. So you all make sure to text him, call him, or message him and ask him how much of a shitty time he's having right now. No pun intended, Harb. We love you. We miss you. We'll have you back on here soon. Uh, Special abbreviated episode. We usually go about an hour or so. But got Jordan Moore, a Tennessee basketball. I call him a stats analyst. Great follow on X. Posts a lot of insight into Tennessee basketball from the analytical and statistical side. So had a conversation with him breaking down where Tennessee's at basketball wise. Is they're 7-5 right now after the loss to Kentucky on Tuesday night. But where are they right now? Why are they where they're at? And what do they need to do uh, to move forward and finish the season in a positive way? We also talked a little bit about lineups that Tennessee plays and how our prediction on where they finish the SEC season. Right now, Tennessee, like I said, is 20-5 overall, 7-5 in the conference. They've got 6 games left, 3 on the road, 3 at home, I believe. So, still a lot in front of Tennessee. They may not win the SEC championship as far as the regular season goes. That might be out of reach at this point, but still a lot to play for. They're a friend. I think Lenardi had them as a 2 seed. They're a fringe 1-2 seed right now, probably more on the 2 seed side than a 1 seed, but still a lot to play for. A high seed. You want to have honestly, you want to have a top 4, top 16 seed, which would put you as a 1 through a 4 seed. But honestly, you probably want to be a 1 or a 2 seed. And Tennessee, we mentioned this when we talked to Jordan. When Tennessee's on offensively and playing consistently on that end, there's almost nobody in this country. I don't even want to say conference in the nation that Tennessee can't beat. But when they have games like they did against Kentucky the other night, like Florida a few weeks ago on the road, like Vandy, where they got hot late, but they dug themselves in such a hole that they couldn't dig out of it. When they have games like that, they're very beatable. And that could, as Harbin said a couple weeks ago, the shooting slumps, and I don't even want to call it a slump, just the shooting inconsistencies will probably be Tennessee's downfall this year. Whether that's in the first round of the NCAA tournament or whether that's in San Antonio in the Alamo Dome in April. It could be any one. I mean, if you've watched Tennessee, and I'm assuming people that are listening to this show right now have watched Tennessee quite a bit, that's what Tennessee is. I mentioned this to Jordan on our show or on the interview that you'll hear coming up. As soon as you all figure out and understand that this is what Tennessee basketball is, I'm not saying it makes it more enjoyable or easier to watch, but you won't get as mad watching it. Maybe you will, but I know going into a Tennessee game that there's probably going to be some stretches where they can't throw it in the ocean. But then there's going to be some stretches where they look like the 96 Bulls. They can't miss on the offensive end and teams can't score against them. Tennessee does a lot of things really well. They rebound the ball well. They don't turn it over. They play elite defense. I know there were some breakdowns late against Kentucky, but they still held Kentucky under their normal average. Tennessee plays elite defense, whether some people like it or not. But Tennessee does a lot of things really well, and they also do one thing not so well sometimes, and that's shoot the basketball. So we get into all that with Jordan. We break down Tennessee analytically and realistically about what do they need to do to get better. Tennessee baseball starts on Friday. If you're listening to this, it probably is Friday. The defending national champions. How awesome does it sound to say that or feel to say that? They kick off with the Hofstra Pride this weekend at Lindsey Nelson Stadium, a half renovated Lindsey Nelson Stadium. If you haven't seen any pictures, look them up. Half the renovations are done. They'll have more work to do this off season, and I'm sure they'll continue work during the season what they can. I drove by the other day, and it looks like it's a mess, construction wise. But excited to see the Diamond Vols back. The weather looks pretty awful this weekend. I was planning on trying to go to at least the Sunday game, but it looks like it might pour rain Saturday and Sunday, and it's supposed to be a high of 46 or 47 on Friday. So not great baseball weather, but good thing is Lindsey Nelson Stadium has turf, so they should be able to play those games unless it just comes a downpour. So we'll see. But Vols kick off their national title defense, SEC title defense, national title defense. They kicked that off on Friday. One interesting note, Albert Osuna, that transferred from North Carolina late in the game, just a couple, 3 weeks ago, has still not been ruled eligible by the NCAA. Shocking. I know you're shocked. He has filed a lawsuit similar to the one that um, the Vanderbilt quarterback, whose name is slipping my mind, filed earlier in the season, trying to get his JUCO eligibility or trying to get his JUCO tenure ruled as time not against him, so he can come here and play. So honestly, he's trying to get 2 years with the Vols, which would be big because they need him at first base. They're missing Blake Burke at first, since he's moved on to pro ball. So looking for a first baseman, but that's something to watch. Another thing, not really well, it is on the field, is the uniforms. I've seen a lot of pictures of possibilities of throwback uniforms and different style of uniforms. I don't know why Tennessee, if they are changing, feels the need to change their uniforms. They have some of the best uniforms in the game. The cream uniforms with this logo, if you're watching, the script Vols is amazing. The orange jersey, like I'm wearing this hoodie here, is one of the best in baseball. As much as I'm not a fan of the black uniforms, those black uniforms are pretty cool. The only ones I thought they could fix was the home white, and I think they had a pinstripe with a power tee on it. And I think it looks like they've gotten rid of that for a solid white with a power tee on it. And then supposedly there's rumors of a throwback type jersey that's coming, so we'll see. But it'll be interesting to see what threads Tennessee wears this season at home and on the road. So uh, with winning a national title comes a lot of spoils, and maybe getting additional uniforms might be one of them, even though I think what they had was good enough. So we'll see. So without further ado, we'll get to our interview with Jordan Moore. And like I said, a lot of great insight on Tennessee analytically, and we also take a look at Tennessee, what they need to do to finish the season strong and put themselves in a good position for March. So here's our interview with Jordan Moore. All right, I want to welcome in to this week's show Jordan Moore. He is a self-proclaimed stats nerd, according to your X or Twitter bio. Welcome to the show, Jordan.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to join.
So wanted to talk a little UT basketball. Yeah, since we recorded our last episode, Tennessee has gone 2-1 with wins over Missouri and Oklahoma, and then this past week a loss to Kentucky. Just breaking down the past 2 to 3 weeks for Tennessee, what's some things they've done really well and some things they've done poorly? I guess might be all over the place with that question, but from your point of view, like, what are they doing really well right now? What are they not doing well?
I mean, I think that, is a game by game situation as the three games that you kind of talked about, which is, the offense will show up in glimpses. I mean, it may show up for a half in the case of the Missouri game, or it may show up for an entire game like the Oklahoma game, or it may not show up at all like the Kentucky game. It's the inconsistency on that end of the floor. Defensively, I still think they're pretty good on the defensive end. The defense kind of in the Kentucky game kind of went into a shell there late, but they still held Kentucky to 11 points below their season average to 74 points. So the defense is still pretty good. It's still there. And it's the same song and dance that we've seen with Coach Barnes, over the handful of years outside of really 2019 and the Dalton Connect year, which is the defense is still there, but are you going to have enough offense consistently?
Do you think, like, I noticed on Ken Palm, Tennessee, excuse me, is ranked 39th, maybe 38th now in adjusted offense. That's about kind of where they were last year, this time, even with Dalton Connect, maybe a little bit higher last year. Is that good enough with the number one defense to make a run like they did last year? I know Alabama is similar to Tennessee, but it's in the opposite direction. Their offense is very highly rated. Defense is about like Tennessee's offense. They don't seem to have a problem winning a lot of games. Can Tennessee's current setup with an inconsistent offense and a very good elite defense push them where they want to go in March?
The answer to that is it can, yes. I think that's also determined by two things, though, which is what type of path do you get, first of all, when it comes to March, the matchups. And then secondly, does that defense show up for every single game? Because you've had some examples over the last handful of years where a defensive oriented team has made a deep run in the NCAA tournament. San Diego State was one of those just a handful of years ago, but their defense showed up every single night for them. It seems that in Tennessee's case, that they'll run into that one game in the NCAA tournament where the defense isn't elite, and then they just don't have enough offense to help their defense out. So, can they make a run with this type of offense and defense? Yes, but you put a lot of stress on the defense to have to be elite every single night because you very likely know the offense isn't going to be consistent enough to propel you when your defense isn't there. College basketball the last 5 to 6 years has really geared more towards the offensive end. I mentioned this the other night somewhere that everybody talks about the NFL game and how college football will steal things from the NFL and how it trickles down. And really, what you're seeing right now in the college game is the NBA game trickling down into the college game. You see more and more schemes and offensive styles being similar to that of what the NBA looks like. And then you also add that into the fact that a lot of these kids that come into college are playing NBA styles and AAU tournaments throughout the summer. They're more skilled than ever, more shooters than ever. So you go back and look. I think I put a stat up last year. You just go back like the last 10 years and do like every 4 year increments or every 2 year increments, and the average defensive rating for teams to make a Final Four goes down. It gets worse, and the average offensive rating gets better and better and better. So it's more than ever that you got to be good on the offensive end if you really want to make a run.
I mean, I don't think you would say Tennessee's bad on the offensive end. I mean, they're currently in 38th in adjusted offense. There's what, 350, is it 356 teams in
I
college
think,
basketball or something like that.
yeah.
So they're in the top level offensively, but it's still, I don't know. You mentioned it a minute ago. Do you think they're putting so much stress on their defense with their inconsistencies offensively that it's leading to breakdowns like you saw very late in the game? I mean, they still held Kentucky below their average, well below their average, but it also, they had a lot of breakdowns late, like you mentioned. Do you think that the stress of having to play, they know they can't give up much? Do you think that's leading to some of these breakdowns late in the game?
Yeah, I think definitely. I think just Barnes in general with this program puts so much stress and emphasis on the defensive end of the floor that number one throughout the year, I do think it wears their legs down and wears their body down to where, as we see, shots come up short. And, I mean, that's a sign of being tired and your legs being tired. So I do think that throughout the year, he wears them down on that end of the floor. They have to play so hard defensively and be locked in defensively every single night. That wears on you throughout the year. I mean, we've seen plenty of times with him, a player miss a defensive assignment and not be locked in and they get yanked. So the expectation is just so extremely high on that end of the floor that I do think it has a trickle down effect to the offensive side of the floor to where you're tired, you're worn down. I think, an example of that is a byproduct with two things. I think it was a byproduct of us shooting 45 threes a week or so ago against Kentucky. I think is a byproduct of what they did at Auburn They played so elite on the defensive end at Auburn and held them down, and then 2 days later have to turn around and play Kentucky at home. They didn't have the legs to drive the basketball. They didn't have the legs to get to the mid range, so they shot 45 threes because they were tired and they were exhausted.
Yeah. And that's something I was telling a friend of mine the other day. Tennessee's one of, I don't know who else in the conference hasn't had theirs yet, but Tennessee's not had an off night yet. They've played either Saturday, Tuesday or Saturday, Wednesday, the whole conference season. I know they've got that off day coming up next week after the Vandy game this Saturday, but I think that has a lot to do with it too. Like you said, like, they're working so hard on the defensive end, and now also factor in they've not had a night off like most other teams have. I think didn't they catch Auburn and Kentucky, who both came off of byes?
They caught Auburn off of their bye, and then Florida when we beat
Florida.
them at home. They came off their bye. Another aspect of the being tired thing too is, I was told that Rick really doesn't let up when the season comes and as the season gets deeper, that the way he coaches in the preseason and throughout the summer and how hard he is on them and how often they have to practice, it doesn't change once the season gets here. Like I think it was about 2 weeks ago. I think it might have been Matt Painter at Purdue. Somebody asked him if he was worried about his team being tired and how do you take care of that as the season goes on. And he basically said that I'm not naive enough to think that we're going to get worn down as the season goes on. So I try to give our players extra off days because if we're having to coach them hard right now, we didn't do our job 2 or 3 months ago,
Yeah.
and we shouldn't have to do that. But I've been told that Rick really doesn't let up. I mean, it's the same
Mm.
Rick 3 months ago in January, in February, and March. And I think it's just combined with the defensive effort, combined with the not letting up in practices and so forth and so on. You see, like, I think it might have been a year ago too that I put this up on Twitter that if you look at his record each month, every year as the season goes on, it gets really worse towards the middle end of February and in March. And I think that's just a byproduct of his teams getting worn down as the season goes along.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, they do. I mean, you just watch him during a game. You don't have to watch him during a practice, but watch him during a game, how hard he is on them. So there may be something to that. You tweeted, I think it was a couple, maybe 3 weeks ago, about the lineup, and you mentioned a specific lineup that Tennessee doesn't play a lot, and whether that's because they start and have different rotations, I don't know why they don't, but tell everybody what that lineup is and why they're so good.
Yeah, about 2 weeks ago, I think it might have been right before we played Kentucky at home. I was just kind of, looking at a couple of websites that I used to pull my stats and stuff from, and trying to do like a midseason deep dive to see if any kind of type of trends or anything. And the one lineup that kept jumping off the screen is the lineup that has Zakai, Gainey, Chaz, Igor, and Felix Akpara. And I went and looked just to see how many minutes they may have played or how many possessions they played because it was clear with looking at the stats that it's our best lineup, and it was the second most minutes and second most possessions. But then I went and looked at like how they used that throughout the SEC play, and I noticed that in the Vanderbilt game when we played them there, we made that big comeback in the second half. That's the lineup that was in the game. Um, the lineup against Missouri, that was the lineup that was in the game. The Auburn game when we played them there, he tried to end the game with that lineup, but then Gainey fouled out with about
Yeah.
2 minutes to go. But we were ahead when Gainey fouled out. But what I noticed was they weren't utilizing it as if it is their best lineup. Their starting lineup with Meshack inserted for Gainey is the one that gets the most minutes every game, is averaging the most minutes, has the most possessions, most minutes played together, so forth and so on. And I looked at the drastic difference between those two, and I tweeted this out yesterday too. Our starting five in SEC play has the worst box plus minus, the worst
Yeah.
net rating, the worst offensive rating, the worst shooting percentages. And that's the lineup you're starting. But, vice versa, the lineup with Gainey and SEC play has the best net rating, has the best offense, is the best shooting offense. And then you look at the defensive ratings, there's no fall off. So there's no excuse of, well, maybe they're playing the starting five because they're so much better defensively, and that's what Barnes wants. They're both pretty much equal on the defensive end, and one is clearly above the other. and offensive efficiency. When I looked at it about 2 weeks ago, I want to say our offensive rating per 100 possessions was about 132.8, somewhere in that ballpark, and that would be the number one offense in college basketball because Auburn's right around, I think, 128, 126, somewhere in that ballpark.
Hmm.
So that lineup would be the best offensive lineup in all of college basketball. And this lineup really caught fire last week when he put it in the second half, and they stormed back with an offensive barrage, and beat Missouri. Now it's kind of really been the talk of the town and everything. But again, they used it against Missouri. But then, of course, we blew out Oklahoma. They barely used it in Oklahoma for 42 seconds to end the half. And then for
Wow, really?
Kentucky, yeah, for 42 seconds, they ended the first half. The last 42 seconds, they used it. And then for Kentucky, the other night, it played right around 2.5 minutes in the first half. They were +4. You didn't see it again until they went down 61-60 with 3.5 to go. And then he put it in there.
Right. Yeah, it's crazy how that lineup is so much more efficient and the output changes. And I was just looking here at Ken Palm. You mentioned Auburn. I mean, I think their rating, and this could have changed, but they're at 131. The next closest is Alabama at 127.2. What, and you may know this more than I do, and I may be putting you on the spot here. I was watching basketball or some games after Tennessee played the now infamous game where Carl Ravitch said that the SEC's 500 since the season started. I don't. He tried to play it off like he just made a statement incorrectly, but he said several times in the game, and he never could get Jimmy Dykes to really bite on it. But he couldn't figure out why Tennessee's still rated so highly. I think Seth Greenberg said something similar when they went to the studio. But if you look at the analytics, Tennessee's still top five, top six in most of those. Why do the computers love Tennessee so much? Where now the voters may start souring on them when they look at that 7-5 SEC mark.
Yeah, if you're going to look at, the analytical side of it, it's because their defense. I think their defense is about 2.5 or three
Yep.
points better than the second place team, so that's holding a lot of weight. Um, so that, and then they also do adjust it by the strength of your opponent, and so that kind of helps out. But your defensive rating right now is really holding the cake for how highly you're rated. If you look at like polls and like your net ranking, that type of stuff, it's because you have wins at Louisville, and Louisville's been pretty good in the ACC
Mhm.
play. It's because you beat Illinois, and they're still pretty good in the Big Ten. You do have a win against Florida. And now Arkansas is kind of starting to play a little bit better, and you have that win. So when you really look at the wins that we have, that's why they keep us so highly rated. In the polls. But also going back to the analytics and also talking about the polls, if you also look around, we're still highly rated in a lot of stuff because teams behind us keep losing. I was
Yeah.
looking at it. I was looking at it today. Like the ESPN Power Rankings had us fifth at 20-5. I'm like, I'm surprised we didn't slide more. But then when you go look at like 6, 7, 8, 9, they're 17-7. They're 18
Yeah.
and 6. And here we are 20-5. So there's a clear gap of, and you may see that on Ken Palm too. Of I think
Yeah.
it's Alabama, Auburn, Duke is clearly like 2 or 3 points higher than Tennessee. A couple other schools there in the second tier. Then there's a drop off to a third tier.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we've been saying all year Duke and Auburn, but I think you need to put Alabama in that category now. I mean, they're sixth currently in Ken Palm, but I honestly think they're better than that. But I mean, I think Tennessee's in that next batch. I mean, personally, I know the offense looks rough sometimes. And they've had some defensive breakdowns, but they're still probably the most elite defensive team in the country. And when the offense clicks, there's not many teams that can beat these guys right now. So that's going to be a big key for me going down the stretch is can the offense find a little consistency? I don't think you can have a game, especially against a team like Kentucky, who many said was a bad loss. I didn't think it was. I mean, it sucks losing to your rival twice in the same season, but they're still a very good basketball team. It's not like they're LSU or Georgia. But you can't have Gainey and Lanier go 0 for 11 from 3-point range. I mean, if they make two or three between them, that game's probably totally different. But those guys, and I was talking with somebody today, Chaz Lanier is a 41% three-point shooter, but he has these games randomly where he's just non-existent. I know he had 10 points against Kentucky, but he had to work really hard for that, and the outside shot just wasn't falling. I mean, I don't know what you think, but I think for Tennessee to be successful going forward, he cannot go 0 for 11 or 0 for 7 and then 0 for 11 between him and Gainey. They just can't do that.
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One, our worst loss is probably what at Vanderbilt when you
Yes.
really look at it. I mean, I agree with you. Losing to Kentucky is not a bad loss because they are a good basketball team and they're pretty high in all the metrics. Losing to Kentucky as a Tennessee fan, we
Yeah.
hate it because it's our
Yeah.
rival, right? Also, how you lost to them is aggravating to a lot of our fan base because it's like we see the same movie over and over and over, which is lack of offense. So that kind of gets frustrating too. And then to the Kentucky point, also, sitting Igor for as long as he did in the second half, that
Yeah.
kind of made no sense to me, especially when he comes out early in the second half and he is your offense. He is the one creating the offense, and then you put him on the bench. Um, but yeah, I think off we are what we are, and really outside of having Dalton Connect last year, you've kind of been the same team for the last 5 to 6 years under Rick Barnes, which is elite defensively, inconsistent offensively. Um, so it really just comes down to can this team shoot the ball well enough and get hot at the right time? And if you can, combine that with the defense, you can make this team can still make a run to the Elite Eight. If it gets the right matchups, it can maybe even make a run to the Final Four. The talent's there, the defense is there. It's just at the end of the day, can you make enough shots? On the Chaz Lanier point, yeah, he's shooting 41%, but in SEC play, he's shooting 33% from three. So once the competition stepped up and the athleticism stepped up, he's not been as elite of a shooter. And really, he's really kind of just been regulated to more of a spot up shooter, catch and shoot type guy because he can't create his own shot. And, I mean, he's not Dalton Connect, clearly. He's not that type of player or that type of athlete. And he can't create his own shot. He has to get his shots coming off screens within the flow of the offense. He can't create his own space. But you're right. You can't if this team wants to go where it ultimately wants to go to the first Final Four ever. Jordan Gainey and Chaz Lanier can't go over in a game. Like at least one of those guys, combined with Zakai and Igor, have to put the offense on their back and carry them. If both of those guys don't show up and you're relying on Zakai and Igor to carry it, it's probably not going to go very far because you really need more of a three-headed monster. And it doesn't matter what three combo, but you kind of need a three-headed monster offensively.
Really quick, do you think Tennessee needs to push the tempo more than they do? I know that's not in their DNA per se. I'm not saying they're like Conzo Martin's teams that walk the ball up the court, but they have a really slow tempo and pace of play. Do you think they need to push it more? Would that help this offense?
Yeah, I definitely think it would because what that will help is you can get easy points without the defense being set. And Lanier is a really good transition shooter in the transition offense. Even Gainey is really good in transition offense. And you got guys that can get out and run. Igor at his height can get out and run. Clearly Zakai can, Gainey can. So I think to be able to help your offense generate some easy points and easy buckets, that it definitely should. It's a lot harder when teams make a basket. It's a lot harder to push it, but off a defensive rebound. I mean, the other night against Kentucky, when they went on their run, they were pushing tempo. They finally started pushing a little bit, and the offense clicked. The
Yeah.
Missouri game, you go back to the
Yes.
Missouri game, they started pushing tempo, and they got him into the flow of the game and got him some easy transition buckets and easy offense. So to help jumpstart it, I definitely think they should start pushing the tempo. The flip side of that, one of the things that I've heard, I don't know how much I buy into this, but one of the things that I was told the reason why they may not be pushing tempo is because it goes back to the defensive end. He doesn't want them to wear themselves out defensively and then also wear themselves out running up and down the court trying to play a high tempo style. He wants to slow it down and have them kind of save themselves to bring that intensity on the defensive end. But with this offense and you have them running off screens for 30 seconds of shot clock, what's the difference in running off
Yeah.
screens for 30 seconds or running up and down the court and pushing
Yeah.
tempo?
No, you're right. I feel like it would benefit them. I'm not saying the whole game, not run a system type offense, but push it, run that secondary break, and then see what happens. And I think sometimes they woe it down, and it may be because they're literally only playing 8 players. I don't count Boswell playing because he's just in there sporadically, but I've been wondering if the tempo, if it increased, would it help? Um, so last question. Tennessee's got 6 games left. They host Vandy this Saturday. They're at A&M, at LSU. They've got Alabama at home, at Ole Miss, and they close out the season with South Carolina. How do you see the rest of the SEC season playing out for the Vols, and where will that set them up for March?
Yeah, I think this team is a completely different team at home than it is on the road, which you can make that case for a lot of teams in this conference and across college basketball. But we just seem to be just way better on the offensive end at home than we are on the road. I think LSU, South Carolina, they're the bottom of the conference. Those should be wins. So there's your 2 wins right there. I think you'll get Vanderbilt this weekend. I think at home with the crowd, they'll be locked in. They'll be ready to go to get that team back for what happened in Memorial Gym. So there's your 3 wins. So then it really comes down to the A&M game on the road at Ole Miss and Bama. And for whatever reason, I don't know, but Rick Barnes has had Nate Oates' number for the last couple of years, and that you get that game at home. I can see that maybe playing out like it has the past couple of years to where you slow the tempo down and you're able to hold them below their season average and you're able to get enough offense, to win a slow tempo game. I see 4-2. Um, I we've really struggled playing at A&M. That's not been a good place for us to go play. And they're really, really good. And then Ole Miss. So if you can get, one out of Ole Miss, A&M, Alabama, you're 4-2. So that'd make you 24-7. And
Yes.
that's still looking at the rest of college basketball, that's still borderline 1 seed.
Yeah.
I think unless you just completely bottom out, which I don't see happening, you're pretty much locked into a 2 seed, I think. But if you can go 24-7 and maybe win a game or two in the SEC tournament, that's still a potential of a 1 seed.
I mean, looking at FPI on ESPN, the only game Tennessee's not favored in, at least from the percentages standpoint, is the game at A&M next Saturday, the 22nd. I mean, they're favored against Bama at home. They're a slight favorite against Ole Miss on the road, and heavy favorites against Vandy, LSU, and South Carolina. So if it played out the way the percentages say, Tennessee only loses one more to finish the season. But I think it's more what you said. They'll probably lose 2, maybe 3. Harb and I on our show predicted that Tennessee would have anywhere from 6 to 8 losses in conference play, and they're right on track for that right now. And I told somebody this today. I said, the quicker you understand that Tennessee's going to play games like they play, the easier it doesn't. I'm not saying it's easy to watch, but the easier it is for you to understand, like, they're just going to be in a grinded out battle most games. And I think that's what most of these games are going to be like. I mean, I could see them taking it to South Carolina to end the season, but if that game was at South Carolina, I would feel a lot different. I mean, they took Ole Miss to the wire last night, but
Yeah.
yeah, I see a 4-2, maybe a 3-3 top finish to the season, but that still probably gets them at least a 2 seed, in my opinion. It might drop them to a 3, but the danger is it's going to drop them. I mean, they're the 7 seed right now in the SEC tournament. So you're playing on Thursday right now. And they were still playing on Thursday before Kentucky the other night, but they need to string some wins together if they have any hopes or aspirations to get to where they're only playing Friday, possibly Saturday, Sunday.
Yeah, I mean, that Kentucky game the other night, I think if you look at the standings, is a difference between maybe being the 4 seed and being the
Hmm.
7th seed right now.
Yeah.
Um, I think Florida is 1 game ahead of you.
Yeah.
Missouri's a half a game ahead of you. So if you win that game the other night, you're sitting with the double bye currently, probably. Um, and then this popped in my head too, talking about the end of the stretch. You mentioned earlier, next week's a bye week. So having that whole week off, how much does that help them going into that A&M game and having fresh legs? I mean, that could be a benefactor to where maybe they do go down there and pull that game out, and maybe you kind of do look at a 5-1 finish or a 4-2 finish. So Um, it the bye week for them is coming at the right time. They do need a rest here at the end. Like as you mentioned, them really only playing 7 to 8 bodies. They do need to have a week off to kind of refresh, rejuvenate for the stretch run. But also, last year down the stretch, they had a tough ending to the season last year, and they pretty much had to go 5-1 to win the SEC regular season championship last season, and they did it. So that this end of the season, end of the stretch here is not as tough as last year, but 6 games left. If you can go 5-1 again, you're probably the fourth seed in the SEC tournament.
Yeah, because you got A&M in front of you now. Ole Miss is in front of you. Alabama's in front of you. I don't know that you'll catch them at this point, but um, protect your home court and then see what happens on the road is my motto. And they've got three opportunities at both coming up, so we'll see. Um, Real quick before we go, Tennessee baseball starts Friday. How do the Diamond Balls do this year? Do they repeat? Do we go back to Omaha or do we fall short?
I think they definitely go back to Omaha. I think this team is talented enough to get back there. You're probably going to host, the super regionals, the regional super regionals. So, I think they definitely get back to Omaha and keep that streak going. And then, will they have enough pitching? The big thing to me is getting AJ Russell back mid-season. I mean, that guy can be, an ace of a staff right there. So if you get that guy back and he is as good as he was before the injury of what people were saying he was, the talent is there to repeat. Maybe don't have quite as much experience as last year's team did. Uh, but the talent's definitely there to go back and repeat. So I do think they get back to the World Series.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if they don't, it'll be obviously a disappointment. I don't know that they repeat on the national stage or even in the SEC, but I think getting back to Omaha every year is the goal, obviously, of a lot of programs, but especially this one now, especially after what we did last year. But it'll be interesting to see the starting rotation. I was surprised that Phillips was named a starter. I mean, you just watch that guy pitch. He's got all the tools. He's got the body, but last year he was a little erratic, and maybe I trust Frank Anderson, and if Frank Anderson thinks he's good enough to start, and maybe he's one of these guys that only throws 2 or 3 innings when he starts, and they use a bullpen game. But that was interesting. But I think getting AJ Russell back, like you said, is going to be huge whenever that happens. I think he's probably still a few weeks out. So, but yeah, baseball's back, and there is more talk about baseball right now than basketball, and we're in the middle of basketball season. Understandably so. We just won the national title. So, Jordan, tell us where we can find you on social media and what you do when you're not on social media.
Yeah, I really the only social media that I use is X/Twitter. It's at Jordan Moore _21. That's where I pretty much post everything that I find. I do Fox Sports Knoxville. I get on there with them from time to time. I do a couple of shows with those guys. I do overtime from time to time with William. Um, but other than that, that's pretty much where you can find me. I just want to say thank you for letting me on. I've been
Yeah.
listening to your guys' stuff for a while, and I enjoy it. I enjoy your guys' show. So been a fan for a while, so I'm glad I could finally jump on with you guys.
Awesome. Well, appreciate you coming on. And I like stats. Harb gets on me all the time on here. He says piss on your analytics. But really, when you look at it, that can kind of tell you how a game. I know there's other factors in it. I've played sports. I understand that. But you can look at the analytics and say that game is probably going to play out this way. And you bring a lot of that on your social media on X, and a lot of good breakdowns of film after games. That's one thing I like that you do that you don't see a lot of that. One question I didn't ask you, and I'll get you out of here. Do you think, and I know the answer to this question because we're Tennessee fans, but in a serious manner, do you think Tennessee fans overreact when Tennessee loses in basketball? I feel like they do a little bit. Some of the stuff's justified about the offense, but from an outside perspective, outside of my bubble, do you think Tennessee fans overreact when we lose a game to a team like Kentucky?
Yes, and I wouldn't say that's just reserved for basketball. I think that's
True.
reserved for football or almost any other sport there
Yeah.
is. We're an instant gratification society, and you know you and we feel like we should win every game all the time, nobody else loses or anything like that. But when you really look across the landscape, really outside of Auburn this season, which they just lost the other night, everybody loses games, and
Yeah.
I try to take a step back sometimes and look across the landscape, whether it's football or basketball, and see how we compare against everybody else. Um, but I can get just as frustrated. I mean, watching that
Oh,
Kentucky game the other night, if you would have saw me 4 minutes to go in that game,
yeah.
seeing the lineups that we had out there, I was ready to put my hand through the TV. I was so ticked off at how that game was being played. But yeah, I think we overreact. I've said that for years that we're probably the most overreacting fan base in all of sports. But on the flip side of that, we're also probably the most passionate fan base,
Yeah.
but in collegiate athletics, and we see that passion at basketball games and football games. Um, and like you brought up something about real quick, like the film breakdown and everything else. It's just something that I wish more of the Knoxville media did. I look around at some, I'm a big pro sports guy. I love pro sports. And I follow some NBA accounts and some NFL accounts of specific teams that I like. And I see a lot of their media people creating film breakdowns and creating analytical breakdowns and doing really good content like that. And, about a year ago, I kind of just looked around the Knoxville media and there's nobody that
Doing
does
that. Yeah.
anything like that, and I eat that stuff up, like film breakdowns or analytical breakdowns. I love that. And I understand for you and I, it's probably a niche thing. Not everybody's going to like that
Yeah.
stuff. But the people that do, they eat it up. And so that's why I've kind of decided to try to dive into some of this stuff with football and basketball, just because I saw a little niche for it from people like you and I that like that stuff. And I love it. So that's why I decided to start putting it out. But I do wish more of the media that we had here that covered Tennessee athletics did more deep dives into film and analytical stuff.
Yeah, it'd be cool to see because there's just not, like you said, there's none of that out there right now. And you can a day or so after a game, you'll put out three, four, five, six different, whether it's a set play or situations that happen. And it's stuff that you may not see when you're watching it live. And if you go back, I try to go back and rewatch the games because I do miss stuff because I'm either talking or yelling at the TV, whatever it may be. But you do miss things, and that's a cool aspect that brings to it. So you're right. That's an unexplored or untapped market, you might say, in our area. But Jordan, appreciate you coming on and talking some hoops. We'll try to get you back on again before the season's over.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for letting me on here. And if you ever want me back on, just reach out to me and I'll be happy to jump back on with you guys.
All right, appreciate Jordan coming on with us. We'll have him back on at some point before the season ends. Um, Talked to Jordan before and after the show and learned that he's kind of a Straw Plains guy. So shout out for that. Got somebody here in the area that I didn't know about. So Strawberry Plains is where it's at. If you guys aren't in Straw Plains, you're missing out. There's only one Strawberry Plains, and it's in the world, not just America, but in the world, and it's right here, and we're in it. Appreciate everybody listening this week. Remember, you can find us on YouTube, and we're on Spotify and Apple. If you're watching us on YouTube, appreciate you guys watching us. Remember to hit that like and subscribe button down below. Maybe leave a comment, share the video for us. Try to get that algorithm going. Also, like I said, you can listen to the audio version if you're driving around for work or traveling anywhere this weekend. You can listen to us on Apple Podcast, on Spotify, or I think anywhere else you get podcasts. So be sure to look us up there. So for Jordan, appreciate him coming on. We'll be back hopefully Sunday night. Daytona 500 is this Sunday. I've got my Stuart Haas, which is now a relic hat, as that organization is no longer with us. Daytona 500 is this Sunday. As soon as it's over, Harb and I hopefully will be back to break down a Tennessee win over Vandy. They really need it this weekend to right the ship and try to get themselves in a good position going forward. But we'll hopefully be back with a new episode later this weekend. Appreciate everybody listening, and we'll see you guys next time on the Section YY8 podcast.